Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
A few years ago, it would have been unthinkable. As recently as last month.
Hey guys, please work. Ooh, preemptive like. Already. War Funds, great channel. Original link top of the description if you haven't seen it yet or just want to watch it on your own. Feel free to do that. My name's Connor if you're new. I like to learn things. I don't know a lot yet, but I'm learning. Make European defense great again. Inside the EU's plan to rearm. Take it away, Simon.
You would have expected it to end with a few years ago. It would have been unthinkable. As recently as last month, you would have expected it to end with platitudes and no observable action. But not this time. On Thursday, March the 6th, an emergency summit brought together all 27 leaders of the European Union for crunch time talks on raising defense spending. The backdrop was the Trump administration's escalating cutoffs of Ukrainian capabilities and loud noises from Washington about refusing to protect fellow NATO members.
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend.
Noises that have most in Europe...
Yeah. It's not a business, my brother. I understand wanting people to reach the 2% threshold in NATO that was agreed upon, okay? But getting rid of those could help them become closer to your enemy, and then that'll suck a lot more than them not paying full price, won't it? Jesus Christ.
Convinced the US will not just abandon them, but become actively hostile. In the words of Politico, it was one of the biggest geopolitical crises to hit the continent in decades, a crisis that required an equally strong response. To the world's amazement, it got one. After spending the last 3 years of war on their continent, acting like it was no big deal, Europe's leaders finally seemed to wake up. And how? And here's how France 24 described the outcome.
Can I just fix this quick? There we go. Sorry, guys. What happened?
Come up. Years of war on their continent, acting like it was no big deal, Europe's leaders finally seemed to wake up. And how? And here's how France 24 described the outcome. Leaders endorsed the European Commission's aim to mobilize about 800 billion euros, that's $860 billion, for defense spending. And that's an astronomical
That's like the US
sum. But it wasn't just the figures that were
defense.
impressive. The summit also ended with a conclusion agreed by all EU members that was practically gung-ho by the bloc standards. To quote, Europe must become more sovereign, more responsible for its own defense, and better equipped to act and deal autonomously with immediate and future challenges and threats. For those of us who've been advocating for our continent to take defense seriously for years, it was the moment that we had been waiting for. A genuine sea change, one that followed quickly on from other major pivots at the national level. The most major of these was doubtless the announcement by Germany's two largest political parties on March the 5th that they would ditch strict debt rules to support defense outlays. As the Center for European Policy Analysis noted, this could free up about $500 billion for Berlin to splurge on its military over the coming years. Nor was Germany alone. Outside the EU, the UK also announced increased spending designed to take the defense budget up to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. In Paris, President Emmanuel Macron both called for a spending surge and talked about extending France's nuclear deterrent to cover the whole bloc. But perhaps nothing quite compared to the shift in attitude on display at Thursday's summit. After years of mealy-mouthed promises to vaguely raise defense budgets, we saw moments like Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen declaring spend, spend, spend on defense and deterrence. That is the most important message. Or how about President of the European Parliament Roberta Metsola saying of the proposed €800 billion increase, it's about damn time. We are ready to put, finally, our money where our mouth is. Now, if you're anything like us, you likely welcome such moments. At the same time, though, you may have wished Europe's leaders could have gone even further. For all the unity on display and talk of a stronger, sovereign Europe, there remain significant questions about the rearmament plans. Questions that can't easily be shrugged aside. Now, we'll be tackling those questions in a moment. Before that, though, we need to fill you in on what exactly was agreed to at this high-stakes summit, because it wasn't quite as clear as Commission President Ursula von der Leyen writing a check for €800 billion and telling everybody to just go nuts. Instead, the 800 billion figure mostly relies on member states surging their own defense spending by an extra 1.5% of their GDP over the next 4 years. If you're wondering why individual countries need the EU to do this, it's because of the strict fiscal rules adopted in last year's Stability and Growth Pact. Here's how Euronews explains it. The pact requires member states to keep debt below 60% of GDP and deficits under 3%. Luckily, those who drafted the pact included a potential opt-out. Known as the National Escape Clause, it allows the debt rules to be suspended in exceptional circumstances. Well, exceptional circumstances are precisely what we're facing. The new rule tweak would therefore exempt defense expenditures of up to 1.5% of GDP from these rules for a period of 4 years. In effect, each EU nation should be able to hike its defense spending by that amount and pay for it via borrowing. Here's where the sums start to get a little hazy. Von der Leyen's calculations assumed that all 27 countries would take advantage of this, creating what she called fiscal headroom of 650 billion euros. However,
So, help me here. Is this like the EU countries who are in NATO, or the EU allowing some pullback of some EU constrictions in order for some countries to not have to worry about that so they can increase military spending?
as of this, creating what she called fiscal headroom of 650 billion euros. However, as Professor of European Union Law Paul Dermine pointed out on Verfassungs's blog, that's a pretty heroic assumption. With public debt levels already high, it's not certain that all member states will be able to take full advantage of the relaxed rules. Nor will they necessarily want to. The mechanism relies entirely on individual capitals being willing to opt in, and the countries furthest from Russia may just conclude that it's not worth it. As Dermine writes, against this backdrop, the Commission's expectation to create additional national fiscal space of 650 billion euros over the next 4 years might prove overly optimistic. End quote.
Isn't that like the current US argument that, like, I'm further away from Russia, why should I spend more? Isn't that the same kind of rationale?
Still,
It's like, I'm all the way over here. I'm not Poland. I'm not the Baltic states. I'm not Finland. I'm not Romania. I'm not... Does Slovakia border Ukraine? I think they do.
Euros over the next 4 years might prove overly optimistic. End quote. Still, activating the escape clause wasn't all that the summit offered. The EU Commission has also pushed forward a related plan to create a 150 billion euro special fund to provide loans to member states wishing to rearm, provided the money is spent on, quoting here, critical defense domains such as air and missile defense, artillery systems, strategic enablers, and critical infrastructure protection. The loans would also encourage investment in Europe's defense industrial base, a pretty major deal at a time when buying American kit is starting to look like a dangerous gamble. As journalist Yaroslav Trofimov wrote on X in reference to Washington disabling targeting for weapons donated to Ukraine, some 2/3 of European defense procurement is spent on American weapons. If the US indeed switched off the targeting of HIMARS in Ukraine, a country fighting a war that not just Kiev but most of Europe considers existential, buying any American technology will soon be considered a security risk. Take it together then. The two plans could unlock up to 800 billion euros for spending in Europe on European defense. Nor were they the only games in town. Although they remain firmly in the proposal stage, other ideas were floated to unlock additional funding, ranging from a rule tweak at the European Investment Bank to allow lending for defense projects to creating a special rearmament bank that could...
That's one thing that I've said a few times in videos similar to this, is that perhaps Trump, getting a president like Trump, who is so open and saying, you know, I don't know how much I'm going to defend Europe, maybe that could be a godsend to Europe as a wake-up moment, rather than having a Trump being elected, a Trump-like person being elected in 2035, right? Where it might be too late. Maybe a Trump-like presidency in America could be the perfect timing for Europe. I know that we are in, and I will include the war in Ukraine as also being a perfect timing for this, because it's a double whammy. It's a double-edged sword. I think that's, no, it's a double whammy, if you know what that means. In that, like, you could finally kick everyone in Europe into gear before still being like, we have America, and then being more and more reliant, and then too reliant, and 10 years later, you have a Trump-like figure. You know what I mean? So on the bright side, this could be a good series of events.
Used to allow lending for defense
Europe.
projects, funding
For the prospect of European full military and diplomatic independence
ranging from
Russia, from
European.
from the USA.
In the proposal stage, other ideas were floated to unlock additional funding, ranging from a rule tweak at the European Investment Bank to allow lending for defense projects to creating a special rearmament bank that could be used not just by EU countries, but also close partners such as the UK and Norway. As Euronews explains of the latter, this new bank would not impact national borrowing capacity as it would issue AAA bonds backed by shareholder nations. This would enable rapid investment in defense procurement and technology without adding to public debt. Beyond that, there were...
I'm not really sure. What is a AAA bond? AAA bonds backed by shareholder nations. Someone help me out with that.
Procurement and technology without adding to public debt. Beyond that, there were also discussions about making sure the next European budget, which will run from 2028 to 2034, includes a €100 billion fund for defense, up from 15 billion today. But since that won't kick in for another 3 years, we're going to park that idea for now, along with the rearmament bank, and look at what was actually agreed at the summit. The first thing to note is that what was actually agreed was, in practice, very little. In a classic bit of EU doublespeak, heads of state didn't sign off on the special fund, but, in the words of France 24, committed to examine, as a matter of urgency, the proposal to provide members with EU-backed loans of up to €150 billion. If there's anything more European than responding to an existential threat by promising to examine a proposal to save you in more detail, we've yet to hear it.
Sorry, guys.
Didn't sign off on the special fund. Very little. In a classic bit of EU doublespeak, heads of state didn't sign off on the special fund, but, in the words of France 24, committed to examine, as a matter of urgency, the proposal to provide members with EU-backed loans of up to €150 billion.
Examine proposal.
If there's anything more European than responding to an existential threat by promising to examine a proposal to save you in more detail, we've yet to hear it. And to be fair, this was expected. Ahead of the summit, the Atlantic Council noted that hard decisions would likely be postponed until after the publication of the bloc's upcoming white paper on defense later this month. And that's likely for the reason that these decisions will be really hard. The EU budget is forbidden from covering expenditures with defense implications. As Paul DeMine writes, the Commission will likely try and get around this by using the emergency clause in Article 122 to set up a special fund. Unfortunately, Article 122 is only meant to be linked to economic policy.
Without prejudice to any other procedures provided for in the treaties, the Council on a proposal for the Commission may decide, in a spirit of solidarity between member states, upon the measures appropriate to the economic situation. In particular, if severe difficulties arise in the supply of certain products, notably in the area of energy, where a member state is in difficulties or is seriously threatened with severe difficulties caused by natural disasters or exceptional occurrences beyond its control, the Council, on a proposal from the Commission, may grant under certain conditions union financial assistance to the member state concerned. The President of the Council shall inform the European Parliament.
Therefore, the outcome might be legal battles over whether creating a special defense fund is even constitutional. And even if it goes ahead, it's debatable whether €150 billion is anywhere close to enough. The Financial Times reports on a recent study by Alexander Burakov and Guntram Wolf.
I swear, some countries could be on the verge of invasion, Europe, EU, and there would still be like, guys, I know they're attacking tomorrow, but there's some bureaucratic hurdles we can't ignore, okay? It's like, so do we just give up?
Which the Financial Times reports on a recent study by Alexander Burakov and Guntram Wolf, which found that Europe would need 300,000 more troops and an additional €250 billion a year to defend itself without American help. These are the sorts of tough questions we alluded to earlier. Questions about the very workability of much that was on offer.
I listened to that.
With the escape clause to fiscal rules that is supposed to raise €650 billion. For bureaucratic reasons, the clause can only be activated for a year at a time. Although it can be renewed by the Commission, and von der Leyen is saying that it will be repeatedly renewed for a period of 4 years, that sort of uncertainty won't help encourage arms manufacturers to make long-term investments in new capacity. All in all then, the summit was that most European of events, a moment that both managed to be groundbreaking in its implications, but also dogged by a feeling that reality might not measure up to the high-flying rhetoric. As such, it's real easy to be cynical, to expect that nothing will change and European leaders will still be sat around debating in committee rooms even as the bombs eventually fall on Brussels.
Does the USA have to like declare war on Spain or on Portugal or something for people to like? What would it take for people to be like, okay, this is a threat and we need to become independent now or very soon? Like,
but just to conclude on that would be unfair.
I'm not saying the US would threaten to invade Spain. I mean, they threatened to invade parts of Canada and Greenland's Danish territory and Panama, so I guess it's not that crazy.
The bombs eventually fall on Brussels. But just to conclude on that would be unfair. For all we've ragged on multiple European nations on this channel for not taking defense seriously enough, we would be lying if we didn't say the current situation gave us a bit of hope. Hope born of dark and desperate times. Yeah, but also hope that Europe's ability to act in a crisis is only growing. To see what we mean, just look at Poland, where defense spending has surged from a little over 2% in 2021 to nearly 5% of GDP today, or the Baltics, where defense budgets are soaring towards 6%. Or heck, just look at any of the nations that responded to Russia's invasion of Ukraine by getting serious about defense. A certain breed of American politician likes to talk about Europe shirking its NATO commitments, but that's broadly not been true since 2022. Today, only 9 alliance members failed to hit the 2% threshold, one of which is non-European, as Canada, and one of which, Iceland, is banned by the treaty from even having a military. More recently, there are also signs that incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz is willing to do what his predecessor refused to do and turn Germany into a defense colossus. As the Financial Times has written, Europe is a rich continent, and the signs are that its leaders can move fast when they have a knife against the throat. Taken together then, the recent summit, the individual spending surges of member states, resembles a beginning. The moment when Europe, at long last, and 3 years too late, wakes from its slumber. Remember, this is a continent with a GDP that absolutely dwarfs that of Russia. It's got a population over 3 times what the Kremlin can call on. It's a continent that's home to world-class defense companies, 2 nuclear powers in France and Britain, and nations like Poland and Finland that are heavily armed and willing to take the fight to the...
And a load of army equipment, vehicles, weapons that aren't, a lot of them, destroyed. The only thing Russia has is military experience now because of their war with NATO, which does go a long way. But still, they're nothing compared to Europe, the rest of Europe.
We've said it before. But by rights, it should be Putin who lives in terror of crossing our red lines and not the other way around.
It should have been Germany in terror, not of another war, and not France and the UK, but it wasn't.
Thursday's summit, then, could be the start of a process whereby Europe finally becomes aware of its own latent power. Threatened in the East by an imperialist warlord, feeling abandoned in the West by what was once its closest ally, it could be that this has created the possibility for a Europe to emerge that understands the need for military strength. We'll have to see how it goes, though. It's still possible that Merz in Germany will fail to scrape the votes together to exempt defense spending from his country's ruinous debt break. It would be still possible that the EU special fund will get bogged down in red tape and the waking giant will simply yawn, maybe scratch his balls, roll over and go back to sleep. But if we were living in a universe where Europe finally chose to stand tall, then the start might just look like this, with 27 leaders all agreeing to a proposal that had once been unthinkable. A proposal that really might make European defense great again.
Great video. I've said all I wanted to say throughout the video. Would appreciate any comments, questions about what I think, answers, calling me out if I'm wrong in the comments. You guys are always great with that. I'd love to hear it. I am excited right now to watch right after this another war graphics video about possible nuclear proliferation, especially to Poland, which I have my thoughts on, and I'm going to give them when I watch that. So, love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. Would appreciate any comments. Hope everyone's doing well. And I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.